It's ridiculous, it's preposterous, and part of our investigatory work is getting to the bottom of it. Who's funding it, who's supporting it, who's cheerleading it, and of course if there's illegal activity related to that, we're going to get to the bottom of that and prosecute it where we can. How did she learn about this? There's an entire network, and frankly some of the media are participating in it, that is trying to incite violence against our law enforcement officers. I'm sorry guys, what's going on here? You guys are meant to report the truth. How have you let yourself become agents of propaganda of a radical fringe that's making it harder for us to enforce our laws? Next question.
The investigation is still ongoing.
I said next question.
Mr. Vice President.
Vice President Vance, you just suggested that this woman who was killed, Renee Good, is part of a broader left-wing network. Who do you think is behind this broader left-wing network?
You're calling Renee Good a deranged leftist. There's been heated rhetoric that we've also heard from officials. What responsibility do you and the president have to diffuse some of the tension that we are seeing play out in Minnesota, bring down the temperature as this investigation is unfolding?
If everything that you say is true, how does being part of that network justify being shot?
Vice President Vance, you just suggested that this woman who was killed, Renee Good, is part of a broader left-wing network. Who do you think is behind this broader left-wing network?
Well, it's one of the things we're going to have to figure out, but here's the way that I put it. When somebody throws a brick at an ICE agent, or somebody tries to run over an ICE agent, who paid for the brick? And who told protesters to show up and engage in violent activity against our law enforcement officers? You see, just with this most recent terrible incident in Minneapolis, you see friends of this woman's or other people who are eyewitnesses saying basically that she was there to engage in obstruction of a legitimate law enforcement operation. How did she get there? How did she learn about this? There's an entire network, and frankly some of the media are participating in it, that is trying to incite violence against our law enforcement officers. It's ridiculous, it's preposterous, and part of our investigatory work is getting to the bottom of it. Who's funding it, who's supporting it, who's cheerleading it, and of course if there's illegal activity related to that, we're going to get to the bottom of that and prosecute it where we can.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for taking questions today. Is there a risk with you describing her as a deranged leftist, talking about very specific facts of these events, when an investigation is just beginning? Are you preempting a thorough investigation by drawing such conclusions? And have you received any information beyond the videos we've seen publicly about this individual, her specific acts, that has informed your point of view?
Well, first of all, the Department of Justice is going to investigate this. The Department of Homeland Security is already investigating this. But the simple fact is, what you see is what you get in this case. You have a woman who was trying to obstruct a legitimate law enforcement operation. Nobody debates that. You have a woman who aimed her car at a law enforcement officer and pressed on the accelerator. Nobody debates that. I can believe that her death is a tragedy, while also recognizing that it's a tragedy of her own making and a tragedy of the far left who has marshaled an entire movement, a lunatic fringe, against our law enforcement officers. I think what is clearly happening here, and it's going to keep on happening unless the Democrats wake up and say, you know what, you don't have to agree with our immigration policies. You don't have to agree with what the president or the vice president believe about immigration enforcement, but why don't you take this to the ballot box? Why don't you vote? Why don't you organize? Instead, what some of them are doing is encouraging people to get violent with our law enforcement officials. It's disgraceful and it's got to stop.
Just to follow up on that question, and again, thank you for taking questions, Mr. Vice President. There's clearly a lot of emotion in Minnesota, across the country, over this incident. You're calling Renee Good a deranged leftist. There's been heated rhetoric that we've also heard from officials. What responsibility do you and the president have to diffuse some of the tension that we are seeing play out in Minnesota, bring down the temperature as this investigation is unfolding?
What we have a responsibility to do is to protect the people who are enforcing the law and protect the country writ large. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you deserve to have the people's laws enforced in the United States of America. Now, again, I'm not happy that this woman lost her life. I'm not happy that this woman was there at a protest violating the law by interfering with a law enforcement action. I think that we can all recognize that the best way to turn down the temperature is to tell people to take their concerns about immigration policy to the ballot box. Stop assaulting and stop inciting violence against our law enforcement officers. That's the best way to take down the temperature. And we're not going to give in to terrorism on this. And that's exactly what's happening. People trying to antagonize, to commit acts of violence. They throw bricks at them. Sometimes they shoot at them. Sometimes they dox them. Sometimes they go to their place of residence and harass their families. This is classic terrorism. And we cannot say that when a far left fringe is inciting violence against our brave law enforcement officials, that we're no longer going to enforce the law. That's rewarding the very people who are engaged in this garbage. The actual reward that they just got is a new assistant attorney general who is going to prosecute and investigate this stuff even more aggressively than before. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for taking my question. So the head of Minnesota's investigations agency says that the U.S. Attorney's Office has essentially cut off the state investigations agency's access to the investigation. What is the precedent for that, and why shouldn't the Minnesota officials on the ground have access and evidence to work on this investigation?
First of all, I wish the state officials in Minnesota would investigate why you have so many people who are using their vehicles and other means to actually interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation. The precedent here is very simple. You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. That guy is protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job. The idea that Tim Walz and a bunch of radicals in Minneapolis are going to go after and make this guy's life miserable because he was doing the job that he was asked to do is preposterous. The unprecedented thing is the idea that a local official can actually prosecute a federal official with absolute immunity. I've never seen anything like that. It would get tossed out by a judge. So what I'd like Minnesota to focus on is the real issue that they're encouraging people. Minneapolis officials are encouraging people to commit violence against ICE officials. It's ridiculous. It's got to stop. Go ahead.
Vice President, thank you. You said earlier that there's a left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and make it impossible for ICE officers to do their job. You told my colleague just now that there's an investigation going on into that network.
Yep.
So if everything that you say is true, how does being part of that network justify being shot?
Well, being part of the network doesn't justify being shot, but ramming an ICE officer with your car, that's what justifies being shot. It's not a good thing, by the way, but when you force somebody to engage in self-defense, it's almost a preposterous question. I'm not saying that funding some of this stuff justifies capital punishment. Nobody would suggest that. The reason this woman is dead is because she tried to ram somebody with her car and that guy acted in self-defense. That is why she lost her life, and that is the tragedy. Now, there may be other violations of the law and other penalties that are associated with those violations of the law. For example, if you are funding violence against our law enforcement officers, I'm not a prosecutor. My guess is that's not the sort of thing that earns capital punishment, but it should sure as hell earn you a few years in prison if you're funding the effort to try to assault our law enforcement officers. I'm sorry, guys. What's going on here? You guys are meant to report the truth. How have you let yourself become agents of propaganda of a radical fringe that's making it harder for us to enforce our laws? You just asked me a question that presumed that the reason why this woman died is because she was engaged in legitimate protest. She tried to run somebody over with her car, and the guy defended himself when that happened.